recent news with stats on the deaths that are occurring in the prisons in Malta. Can we have an idea, an update from you about what's really going on, the state of play?
As you have rightly pointed out, Leah, recently, in the last years, the number of deaths of prison inmates has been on the increase. What we do not have exactly is a confirmation as to which of these deaths are caused by natural causes and which of these deaths, in actual fact, are a suicide. The reason why we do not have the actual statistics stems from the fact that, unfortunately, in this country, when something like this happens, we are faced in a situation and put in a position whereby a magisterial inquiry has to take place. What does this mean? This basically means that a magistrate is appointed to investigate why this has happened. Now, magisterial inquiries are held behind closed doors. Not only are they held behind closed doors, magisterial inquiries also take some time. Why do they take some time? They take some time because, unfortunately, in Malta, we have a system whereby the same magistrates who are assigned, who are given an enormous workload of cases which they have to deal with, they are also given the added responsibility and task of having to carry out an inquiry. And this is why inquiries take some time. In fact, I have long advocated the idea, and I have long been preaching the idea, that it is time that we take up on a proposal which was originally a proposal put forward by the Labour Party in their, if I remember correctly, 1998 electoral manifesto. This proposal, which is a very good proposal, but which, however, was never taken up, provides for a situation whereby the state has ad hoc magistrates whose work is solely and exclusively confined to carrying out magisterial inquiries alone. The workload of these magistrates has increased exponentially in the last years because of the various inquiries relating to money laundering, relating to the fact that the crime has become more sophisticated, crime has become more difficult to detect and therefore more difficult to investigate. And this is why magistrates who, throughout their normal working conditions, have to deal with civil cases, with drug cases, with so many cases, with VAT cases, having put on them also this additional burden of the inquiries, today is a system which needs to be addressed and needs to be changed. Sure. So for your question, what are the actual numbers? Which of these deaths were natural deaths? Which of these deaths were suicides? We cannot really say because, unfortunately, the magisterial inquiries that would have been conducted when a person, an inmate, would have died in suspicious circumstances, we would still not know the outcome of them. And this is a real pity.
So really, since we don't know the outcome, it's very hard to make a comparison with the rest of Europe, let's say.
Yes, it would be very hard, Leah, to carry out that exercise. There is another reason also. When a magisterial inquiry is concluded, and if, for example, the magisterial inquiry concludes that this was a suicide, that there was no foul play, or that this was a natural death, that magisterial inquiry, in truth, is sent to the Attorney General's office and is not really published, it's not really in the public domain. So unless a member of parliament decides to ask a parliamentary question, for example, in order to get the actual data, although the data could, as we have seen and as I have said, have the problems that it won't be complete, but really and truly, if there wasn't a situation of foul play, we would, as a public in general, be privy to the information and the conclusions of the magistrate who carried out that inquiry. In my opinion,
Thank
this is
you.
another area which really needs to be badly addressed.
What's the procedure here in Malta when there's a sudden and unexplained death in a prison?
The procedure for a sudden and unexplained death is exactly as I am saying, the carrying out of an inquiry. This is a procedure that applies not only when there is a sudden and unexplained death in a prison, but also when there is a sudden and unexplained death of any person in respect of whom a doctor has not issued a death certificate because he knows and he can confirm that this death can in actual fact be explained. Unfortunately, the situation is that these situations are investigated by inquiring magistrates. So you can imagine the load that these inquiring magistrates have, and add to that the heavy load that they have of all the cases they have to deal with. A magisterial inquiry, just for you to understand the proportion of the load that they have on them, is also carried out, for example, when there is a traffic accident and somebody has suffered grievous injuries. You know, and everybody knows, how common these traffic accidents unfortunately are, and how common they also are that in traffic accidents people end up suffering grievous bodily harm. Even that is something which a magistrate has to address via a magisterial inquiry.
Sure, sure. What measures are being taken in prisons to safeguard the well-being of prisoners and to prevent these sort of deaths or anything of this sort of nature?
Yes. Prison is divided, Leah, in various divisions. So in prison, you have divisions which in themselves are segregated from other divisions. You have from division 1 to, I can't remember at the moment the amount of divisions that there are, but there are, I would say, not more than 20 divisions, let's put it at that way. So what is being done at the moment is that particular divisions are being put aside, so to say, in order to deal with persons who have just come into prison. So when a person, a new inmate comes into prison, there is a particular division where that inmate is placed in order for him to be sort of going through his quarantine, so to say, and in order for the prison director to ensure that he is COVID-free. Once he is COVID-free, then he is moved on to another division. Similarly, where you have a prison inmate who turns out to be positive for COVID, then unless of course he has to be hospitalized, which is also what happens, he is segregated from the rest of the prisoners. But just like old people's homes, obviously, the situation in prisons is a dangerous situation because you have a plurality of people who are confined within the prisons and therefore within the ambit and the parameters of a confined space who need to be segregated, who need to be put aside from other prisoners. And clearly, COVID-19 has also hit the prisons just like it hit the rest of the island and the rest of all the world.
In your opinion, with regards to the coronavirus and the spread of the contagion, have they managed to keep it contained, and has it been successfully managed in the prisons?
The information that I have is yes, and the answer to your question would therefore be a yes. We did not have a situation whereby there was a spread which was beyond what one would be expecting in the circumstances. Obviously, this has been done with great sacrifices by everyone, but the answer to your question would be yes.
Yes. And what about health in general, their health in general? What measures are taken to have regular physical checkups, mental checkups, and really also rehabilitation where it's necessary?
Let us start with the first part of your question. The first part of your question relates to mental checkups and psychological checkups. When an inmate enters the prison for the very first time, he has to first undergo a medical test, and there's a medical examination which is carried out, which is obviously necessary in order, because a person has to determine whether he is, I don't know, if he's allergic to something or to something else. These things have to be done, and they have to go through this procedure. There is obviously a doctor and a medical service that is available within the prisons, and the situation therefore is that clearly the prison has its own medical team, just like it has its own social workers and its own psychologists. Now, to what extent is this made available? I would say that my experience would tell me that these professionals do their utmost to do the best that they can do in the circumstances. Please keep in mind also, Leah, that our prisons are pretty, I wouldn't say overpopulated, but they are heavily populated, and so the numbers are quite big, which is why the last couple of years it was felt that there had to be further increases in the number of divisions which we have. I would say this has happened quite some time ago now, but the reason is that the population of our prison is not overpopulated, but I would say very heavily populated. Ideally, you should have a situation where every inmate has his own cell, but in truth, the population of the prison today is such that it is not always possible to actually have such a situation.
May I refer to perhaps something completely different? The alleged attempted suicide of the key witness, Melvin Toma, in the Daphne Caruana Galicia inquiry. How could that have been prevented, in your opinion? And also, how can we prevent future incidents like this?
The incident that you are referring to, Leah, is an incident which relates to a person who was not an inmate within the Corradino Correctional Facility. The person in question was a state witness, a person who had been given a pardon, and therefore a person who was living in his home. Whilst living in his home, there was a situation whereby, since he is such an important witness in such a high-profile case, the Commissioner of Police, so in this case the responsibility falls on the Commissioner of Police and not on the Director of Prisons. It is inmates who fall within the responsibility of the Director of Prisons. On the other hand, in this case, being a state witness, his protection, his safeguarding and his well-being was something which fell within the remit of the responsibility of the Commissioner of Police. Now, I am aware, and I have information to the effect that while there were police outside the block of apartments where he used to reside, there were also originally scenarios of having policemen on the inner side of the residence. But then also there was an issue of the privacy and which the witness himself was clearly also asking for. So you can never be attentive enough, clearly. How could it have been avoided? It's not easy I mean, this gentleman was in his home, in the comfort of his home. He was guarded on the outside, so to say. The home was secured and there were patrols and fixed points. Fixed points means that there are actually policemen who are stationed in front of the residence, but on the inside, could more measures have been taken? Yes, you could have, for example, put cameras within the residence, but then we also have to keep in mind that there's an issue of protection, there's an issue of data protection, there's an issue of privacy. I mean, this was a private home, ultimately. Yes. And therefore that makes it very, very difficult. In fact, in this particular case, the information is to the effect, and this is clear in the public domain, that it so happened that his lawyer was meant to get in touch with him at a particular point in time, She kept on phoning. He wasn't answering. And it was at that point in time when the lawyer had this sort of sixth sense, I would say, that something has happened. And the lawyer in question decided to get in touch with the police, who quickly went onto the scene, had to literally burst into the house because obviously the door was closed, and fortunately managed to save the life of this star witness, so to say. In this case, managed to save it. I mean, they took him to hospital, and then the hospital did all the work, but they sort of got him in the nick of time before he would have ended up bleeding to death, basically.
Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Giglio. You're going to stay with us. We're